Hello, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Emma the Cat Lady, and you join me here in the Commonwealth. So we are at Listing Post Bravo. So this is a military bunker. It's fairly central, so Sgt Ironworks is over there, the Slog, Greentop Nursery, so it's quite close to Greentop Nursery, and then the kind of Malden area over here. And if you've done the Brotherhood quest line, then you'll get sent here because this is where Paladin Dance goes once he discovers that he's a synth. But it's spooky season, so we're going to be focusing on some spooky, creepy stories and events in Fallout. But I want to talk about some of the less well-known ones, and there was an interesting story of something that happened here before the bombs fell. So it's an old military bunker, and being a listening post, it's kind of obvious what it was for. It was a place to carry out surveillance of the airwaves, to monitor the radio broadcasts for any potential threats. So they would go through all the different bands of the radios and listen for anything that might give them a clue as to what the enemy was up to. That kind of thing. So we should be able to just go down here in the elevator. So at an unknown point before the bombs fell, Sergeant Sgt Renkse was assigned to this place, and they were supposed to spend a month in the bunker alone. We don't have a confirmed gender for Sergeant Renkse, so we don't really know he, she, they, so we're going to go with they just because we don't know. But they were supposed to be here for a month alone, and the elevator was locked down, so they were... Oh, there's Paladin Dance there. So they were kind of completely isolated. So he just lives here now because we need to pretend that he doesn't exist for the Brotherhood. But yeah, so you can see there's obviously lots of kind of radio equipment, broadcasting equipment and whatnot. But part of it has collapsed. There's... That's great dance. There is a little kind of cave, so you do find a Yaogwai in here and some skeletons as well. May or may not be related, but the cave does let you get into this other room, which has like a bed and stuff, so possibly this is where whoever was assigned to this job stayed. There's ammo boxes and things, so they obviously had supplies. Radio for entertainment that I'll turn off because I forgot that Paladin Dance would actually be here. But yeah, so there is this cave, and then Paladin Dance, he builds this power armor station, I believe, and just kind of stays here if you talk about dying because he's not a real person, all that nonsense. Yeah, so this terminal does have the reports written by Sergeant Renkse, and they tell a very interesting story. So we'll look at the first one, 010. So Captain Rutledge ordered me to take over long-range monitoring today. That means 4 weeks stuck in this bunker with only military rations, old magazines and a transistor radio to keep me company. However, I'll try and make the best of it by doing my job and monitoring the airwaves for any suspicious transmissions. Maybe next month I'll get a more interesting assignment, but for now it's time to kiss the light of day goodbye for a month. So they were kind of locked in down here with limited entertainment. You know, there was some magazines and a radio. Not really a lot to keep one occupied. So definitely not the most fun work assignment, but somebody's got to do it, I guess. And one thing to note is that prolonged isolation isn't always healthy, though, as we'll soon see, and as maybe some of us remember from 2020 and things like that. I mean, I lived alone at the time, so it was just me and the cat, and I only really got to speak to people in person when I was at work, and I did have to go into work as a vet. Obviously can't really examine animals over the phone, so I had to kind of be there. So it's well known that prolonged isolation isn't always healthy. So the next report holds something interesting about a strange message. So Had a strange incident today. I was monitoring the low band frequencies, the stuff normally used by outdated equipment, when I came across a very strange repeating message. It was in English, but it was very difficult to make out due to all the static. It stopped broadcasting after about an hour, but I made out a few phrases. Internal void, dreams are getting darker, and blood runs so still. The only other thing I picked up was what I assumed to be a call sign, DEK. I'm going to send these phrases over to translation in Washington as soon as possible. So that's what they were supposed to do. If there was anything strange on the radio, they were to record it and then send it over to Washington, presumably to the Pentagon, for translation. Obviously, they'd be looking out for broadcasts in Chinese since they were at war with China, that kind of thing. So they sent this over to the boys at the Pentagon. And then there's a follow-up report. Haven't heard anything from Washington yet, so I assume they haven't come up with any answers. While I was waiting, I decided to continue monitoring that same frequency around the clock. I tuned in, but I haven't heard a thing in 4 days. I'm getting awfully anxious to hear something new, or for the translation guys to tell me what the heck I had heard, but for now I'll just have to wait. So they've been monitoring this radio frequency constantly, but there's not been any word from Washington, and the radio frequency that they'd heard the weird stuff on before is now silent and has been for days. They're starting to get a wee bit anxious about it, hoping to hear something new or hoping to get some news back from Washington. And then the next report, which is maybe 4 days later, I'm not sure if these are related to how many days have passed, but this one is very creepy. So I woke up today to a banging noise on the elevator door, like someone was trying to get in. I looked at the readout and it said that the elevator has been in its lockdown position since I got here, so that doesn't make any sense. I decided to activate the bunker's defence systems as a precaution and broke out the emergency rifle we keep locked up down here. I have to admit, a cold chill was running down my spine. The banging continued for almost an hour straight, then it stopped. I don't know why, but I have the strange feeling that this is somehow related to the mysterious broadcast I intercepted. So they're woken up by someone banging on the door like they were trying to get in, but the elevator's been locked down because they have to stay down here, so the elevator's not going to move until it's time for them to swap out with somebody else. Or presumably if there was an actual emergency down there, then they would be able to activate it to let them out. So they got a bit scared and set up the defence system and the emergency rifle, so they obviously had a weapon down here and ammo for just in case. Who wouldn't be scared by that, especially if you're trapped in this bunker, you're locked up in this bunker, you're on your own, and then somebody's banging on the door. So and it lasted for a long time. An hour's a long time to be constantly banging on a door without hurting your hands or your whatever you're using. And they're obviously kind of getting convinced that it's related to the weird broadcast they heard. And you might think that this banging on the door is when the bombs fell and survivors were trying to maybe get inside the bunker. But the later entries that we have suggest that this was probably before the Great War happened, that this all went down. It could be someone was banging on the surface door of the elevator and it echoed down the elevator shaft, but definitely a bit of a strange one, and waking up to something like that has to be pretty scary, especially when you're on your own. And then the final report that we have is 5 days later. So it's been 5 days since the banging on the elevator, and Washington finally broke radio silence to tell me that the holotape recording they received was blank. When I listened to my local playback, I discovered that they were right. My tape has nothing on it. When I mentioned the noises I heard, they told me it was possible I was experiencing auditory hallucinations from being isolated for so long. They said to hang tight and they'd send someone out to relieve me. It's possible that this isolation did something to my mind. Maybe I wanted to find a mystery to solve, to occupy the time so badly. My imagination decided to take over. whatever it was, I hope this doesn't go down on my permanent record. So, they're sort of suggesting, the local recording was blank, the holotape sent to Washington was blank, that Sgt Renkse was suffering from auditory hallucinations caused by the isolation, and promises to send someone out to replace them. Because not all hallucinations are visual. Most people, when they hear that word, would think of seeing things that aren't there, but you do have other kinds. So you can have auditory hallucinations where you're hearing things that aren't really there. And I only recently learned this, but you can even have olfactory hallucination, which means that you're smelling things that aren't there as well. So you can actually have smells that are hallucinations. I only discovered this really recently, that this is a thing, and apparently it's something that women in menopause can have. So interesting one there. So your brain and your senses can sometimes make stuff up, especially if you are dealing with stress, or if there's some kind of mental health problem going on. So a bit of an interesting one. So they maybe did just come up with something just to kind of deal with the fact that they were bored and isolated and lonely. So their brain gave them something to focus on. And this is the final entry, so we don't really know what happened. There's no sort of skeletons inside here that we can find. There is some in the cave, but this obviously has all collapsed, and so has the doorway into that room. So more likely this happened maybe after the bombs fell, but the whole thing with Sgt Renkse happened before all that. Because while there is skeletons in here, it's possible that either the Yalgwai dragged them in here somehow, or something fell in from outside and got in here. It's not really very clear. That looks like kind of collapse, so don't really know, but I think these skeletons and things are probably not related. We've got Brahmin skulls and things as well. Probably not related to any of this that happened. This all probably happened after the war, while the stuff with Sgt Renkse happened before the war. There is a dead military person upstairs, and obviously there's a protectron and things, because the bunker, like all military institutions, had defence systems, so they would have had things like turrets, protectrons, and some of them even have, sentry bots and gutsies and whatnot. So, not a big surprise. And then Dance has kind of made himself at home down here. He's kind of set up everything that he needs, because even though he's a synth, he still has to eat, believe it or not. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting one. So what actually happened to Sgt Renkse? Absolutely could be a case of hallucinations in response to boredom and isolation, like a cabin fever phenomenon. But hallucinations are quite a rare symptom of that, unless the isolation is really prolonged or there's another psychiatric disorder present already. It was only really a couple of weeks that Sgt Renkse was down here, so it's not really that long in the grand scheme of things. But, being isolated for that length of time isn't easy. When I got COVID in December 2021, I had to self-isolate for 2 weeks. Missed Christmas with my family and everything because of it. And it really sucked, because I lived alone at the time. It was just me and the cat. And it was still quite tough, even though I'm quite an introverted person. But at least I could still talk to people by phone. And I had the cat, so I wasn't completely alone in the house. But it's not impossible that, this was a case of hallucinations due to the isolation. But it also could be that something was going on. The phrases that were heard on the radio are very creepy, and they are evocative of something that H.P. Lovecraft would write. So it could be supernatural. We do have confirmed instances of supernatural occurrences in the wasteland, and 2 of them are not really that far from the bunker, and they're also both underground. So first one is Lorenzo Cabot. So this is obviously where we are, listening post Bravo. Parsons State Insane Asylum. It's not far away, it's a few miles maybe. I'm not sure what the scale of the map actually is in the game, but it's just across the water. It's really not that far away. And Lorenzo has been confined underground there since 1898, which is 179 years before the Great War and 389 years before Fallout 4. And the artefact that he has on his head gives him psychic abilities, and he was able to extend his psychic influence beyond the confines of the facility. That's how he influenced the raiders into breaking in to let him out. So it could be that Lorenzo was somehow reaching out psychically to this sergeant that was in this listening post. Doesn't mean that he couldn't influence things like the radio. Would it explain the banging? Hard to say. But, psychic abilities could induce hallucinations potentially as well. So that's certainly something that we can't rule out. I mean, the whole thing with Lorenzo Cabot is quite creepy in its own. But distance-wise, it's really not that far away. And then the other one that's also similar distance away is Dunwich. So this is a very well-established supernatural, creepy, sort of Lovecraftian story. I mean, Dunwich is, the name comes from H.P. Lovecraft's works as well. And if we visit Dunwich Borers, which is the quarry here, we experience hallucinations, and the raiders stationed there definitely have some unexplained anxiety and strange behaviours. There's Hugo's Hole nearby where you literally can hear him shooting himself as you walk in, and you can listen to a very creepy tape talking about what he's been told, that the voices he's hearing telling him to do that. So it's not that far away again, and again it's all underground, so there could be something, there could be some kind of connection there, that the listening post is maybe close to some of the stuff underground in Dunwich Borers, because we know that they weren't just there to quarry, they were looking for something. Very, very interesting, because it's all very much based on the Cthulhu mythos of H.P. Lovecraft. So it could be that some kind of influence is spreading towards this area of the map and affecting Sgt Renkse. Because again, we know that was all going on well before the bombs fell as well. It wasn't something that happened after. But there's creepy goings on. There's creepy goings on in the Dunwich building in Fallout 3 as well. And it's all connected. So, certainly not out of the realm of possibility that there could be something, supernatural going on that's coming from one of these places. And it had affected this poor soldier who was just there to listen for radio broadcasts and lost their mind a little bit. So I'd love to know what you think. Do you think one scenario is more likely? Which one do you think would make the most sense? Or do you think this poor soul just struggled to cope with being locked up and isolated for a month and suffered from cabin fever? Or is there something related to some of the eldritch horrors that are residing just a few miles away? Let me know what you think. And in addition, I do know that the whole story is actually an Easter egg that references the Swedish metal band Catatonia and their album Dead End Kings, which is the call sign was DEK, and the name of Sgt Renkse was the name of the lead singer, I believe, as well. But it's an interesting little story. It's something that's kind of a bit spooky, and it's all pre-war as well. It's unlike a lot of these stories we find where the ending was when the bombs fell. It seems like this one, the whole thing ended before that, because, we know that most of the military couldn't really get in touch with anybody at Washington after the bombs fell, because the president had disappeared, and the Pentagon was pretty badly damaged on the surface as well, which we see at the Citadel in Fallout 3. But Sgt Renkse was in touch with Washington, and they sent someone to replace them. So it's entirely possible that they did, maybe get taken up out of the bunker and sent on leave for a week or two to kind of recover themselves, maybe got sent for some psychiatric help, something like that. And then they got another assignment and moved on with their lives until everything fell apart. Interesting. But yeah, it is. It's quite a spooky story, I think. You just imagine, you know, that you're living in this bunker, you're locked in, the elevator's locked down, and suddenly you start hearing someone banging on the door, and being woken up by that sounds, yeah, very uncomfortable. Oh, where did Paladin dance go? Is he going to bed or something? Just pacing around. Okay, right, see you later, dance. But yeah, we're back here on the surface level, and we do have this obviously military person and the Protectron as well. So that's obviously the entrance to the bunker. And then out here, I don't know if this is just like a helipad. Yeah. But yeah, let me know what you think about this whole story of Sgt Renkse. Did you see this for yourself when you came here? Have you been to Liston Post Bravo? Because I say you only really end up here. Generally, it's if you're doing Blind Betrayal, which is a quest during the Brotherhood storyline, once you discover that Paladin Dance is actually a synth, and Maxon sends you to deal with him. And you can kill him, or you can let him hide here and pretend that he's dead, and talk Maxon into letting you do that and things like that. So it's an interesting little quest line there where you're kind of dealing with that situation. But you know, checking the terminal, you find out that this whole thing kind of happened, and definitely a bit of a creepy one. You know, and so they say that fear, most fear is based on fear of the unknown. So, you know, you're not actually scared of being alone in the dark. You're scared of the fact that you're not alone in the dark. You know, that kind of thing. You know, and being isolated like that, and, you know, locked away and cut off from the world like that, it's not healthy for your mental health, especially if it's for a long period of time. It can definitely mess with your head to a degree, but you know, the other side of that is that you know, there are supernatural eldritch horrors in the wasteland that could be having an impact on things more than we thought. You know, aliens are confirmed canon as well. There's all sorts of weird and wonderful and creepy things happening in this wasteland, so it's always possible that, you know, there was actually something going on, and unfortunately we'll never know exactly what happened to Sgt Renkse, but I think it's a fun little story to kick us off for spooky season. So if you know of any places, especially, I say, I'm more wanting to share places that maybe aren't as well known to the community. You know, Dunwich has been covered very, very well by a lot of people. It's one that I think a lot of us are quite well aware of, because it's such an in-depth kind of reference to Lovecraftian stuff, and it is very, very creepy. But I'm more looking for some of the kind of quieter, better hidden related stories. So there will be more to come next week. But if you know of any places that you think are spooky, and you think that they're not very well known, let me know. So drop them in the comments, or make a post on the community tab and let me know, and I will look into things. But coming Saturday we are going to be talking about the iBots, so that should be fun. I'm very fond of EDE and the iBots in general. I think they're adorable. They're like little puppies. So looking forward to that. And as always, love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.